Okay, Year 13. Today we're going to sort of build on what we did last week, and we're going to produce our 2 paragraphs in a sort of finalised form. So the outcome for today is for you to focus on writing 2 or 3 paragraphs in which you consider different interpretations of this title. That violence in Macbeth is so excessive that it ceases to have any effect on the audience. And then you're asked to what extent you think that the violence in the play is excessive. Don't forget we're looking at AO3, so the whole idea for today is your ability to talk about how it could be viewed as this, but then again it could be viewed as that, or that one character might represent this, but another character might do that, or this particular production presented the violence in this way, but actually you think that this one is more impressive. So by the end of the lesson, hopefully, we'll have lots of paragraphs on my blog, which really all demonstrate a clear understanding that we can think about violence in at least 2 different ways. And also that we can find textual evidence to show this. It would be better if we had paragraphs which actually identified some really key multiple readings and looked at those in depth, maybe even contradicting the title or adapting the title, and also that you really started making reference to some different Gothic elements. And some of you may want to pause the video at this point and have a look at some of the things that are going to help your AO3 move that step further on, where you're actually looking at multiple perspectives from, say, a historical perspective, or looking at multiple perspectives from a critical perspective, taking what a critic says and maybe arguing against it. Okay? To help you as well, I thought I would show you a little bit about how I make notes. So this is an example of what my notes look like. As you can see, they're on a blank piece of paper, always on a blank piece of paper. And I always start in the top corner with a sort of key idea, and here was the question that the first question that I asked last week. And then I kind of make a mind map. So what kind of things did I look at that I thought you might usefully think of as well? Well, firstly, the first question was what type of violence do we see in the play? The idea that we've got murder in the play. The idea that we've got sort of psychological violence and how those might be different. That should say ritual and sacrifice, which is one of your ideas. Then I thought that I would try and work in some Gothic terms and how the Gothic terms might help me to understand it. So I thought about the idea of horror, the idea of terror, the idea that horror is fundamentally physical and arguably kind of is what we might consider to be excessive violence. But then I also thought that terror is also psychological violence, and this idea of kind of the mind being full of scorpions is an interesting one to follow as well. Getting quotations that help to demonstrate this, the idea that horror, tongue, no heart, cannot conceive nor name thee. This is Macbeth after he kills Duncan. Now this doesn't seem to be a man for whom violence has no effect. This actually seems that violence has had a pretty big effect on him. Then I thought about Lady Macbeth as a contrast, or perhaps as something else, and her, this should say obsession with blood. If I zoom back out, you can see blood, was something that might think about. Blood's a pretty violent image, and it's one that goes through the play. And again, I thought that Lady Macbeth was interesting, because I might have 2 different readings of her. Sometimes when she's talking about blood, it seems to be very, very horrific. You might argue about like sort of the result of excessive violence. Sometimes it seems to be more terrifying sort of stuff that's inside her head, but maybe equally as violent. When I got to this point sort of halfway through, I then realised that I actually better make a point to talk about what kind of violence is in the play, so you can pause and have a look at that. The idea that killing Duncan and all of that is important. And then I thought of lots of things to do with, well, the title's quite difficult. How can I break this title down and adapt it and flip it and explore different ideas? So I'm not going to explain all this, but I want you to pause the video and have a look through how my thought processes were working. And when you have finished that, if you want, you can zoom out, scroll across, and zoom in on an essay about horror and terror and how they work, if I can get it to the right kind of zoom. So you might be able to use some critical reading as well. Okay.